The chandeliers were already blazing when the whisper began, a faint shiver of sound that crept along the gilded walls of Ashbourne Hall like a draught through cracked glass. Silk skirts brushed marble floors, fans fluttered with rehearsed indifference, and the orchestra held its breath between movements. At the center of the ballroom stood Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, her gloved hands folded with impeccable calm, her pale blue gown uncreased by anxiety, her expression composed enough to deceive all but the most attentive eye. She had been taught, from girlhood, that dignity was a woman's final defense, that when words failed, silence must stand in their place. Across the room, beneath a cascade of candlelight, Lady Harcourt leaned toward her daughter and spoke just loudly enough to be heard by those who wished to hear. A glance followed, then another. The whisper gathered shape, strength, intention. By the time Eleanor sensed it fully, it was no longer a whisper at all, but a judgment passing from mouth to mouth with polite efficiency. The engagement, it was said, could no longer proceed. No announcement was made from the dais. No formal regret expressed by the family whose crest adorned the invitation cards. Instead, Eleanor was summoned aside beneath the pretense of privacy, led to a small antechamber where the scent of roses could not mask the chill. Mr. Frederick Hale did not meet her eyes as his mother spoke for him, explaining with smooth regret that circumstances had altered, that expectations had shifted, that it would be kinder to end matters now. Kinder. The word fell like a stone. Eleanor listened without interruption, her spine straight, her breath measured. She had known this moment might come. In quieter hours she had sensed the hesitation, the careful distance Frederick had begun to keep, the way his letters shortened, his promises softened into courtesy. Still, knowing did not lessen the blow. It only sharpened it. When Lady Hale finished speaking, there was a pause clearly designed to invite tears, pleas, or protest. Eleanor offered none. She inclined her head once, as if acknowledging a minor inconvenience, and said only, "I understand." Her voice did not tremble. That was its own small rebellion. She returned to the ballroom alone. The music resumed too quickly, as though eager to drown the discomfort of her presence. Eyes followed her, some curious, some sympathetic, many relieved that the spectacle was not theirs. Eleanor crossed the room with the same measured grace she had practiced since childhood, though her pulse hammered like hooves against her ribs. She felt suddenly exposed, as though every step stripped another layer of protection away. No one stopped her. No one called her name. At the threshold, she paused. For a brief, dangerous moment, she considered turning back, demanding explanation, forcing the truth into the open where it might wound them as deeply as it wounded her. Instead, she lifted her chin and stepped through the doors. The night received her without ceremony. Rain had begun to fall, fine and cold, blurring the glow of lanterns into trembling halos. The street beyond the hall was slick with reflected light, carriages lined in orderly rows, their drivers waiting with patient resignation. Eleanor descended the steps alone, the murmur of the ballroom sealing itself behind her like a tomb. Only when she reached the pavement did the weight of it settle fully upon her chest. She had entered Ashbourne Hall as a promised woman, her future neatly arranged, her value quietly assured. She left it unclaimed, her name already reshaped by rumor, her worth recalculated in hushed tones. In Victorian society, a broken betrothal was not merely a disappointment. It was a stain, faint perhaps, but persistent. Eleanor did not cry. Tears, she knew, would come later, in private, where no one could measure them against her supposed failings. Now, she focused on the simple mechanics of departure. She gathered her skirts, signaled for her modest hired carriage, and prepared herself for the long ride home through streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. That was when the horses stopped. The sound cut cleanly through the rain, the authoritative halt of a team accustomed to obedience. Eleanor looked up, startled, as a carriage larger than the others rolled into view, its lacquered black panels gleaming despite the weather. Gold trim caught the lamplight. Upon the door, unmistakable even to those who pretended not to see, was the ducal crest of Ravenscourt. Conversations nearby faltered. Drivers stiffened. Heads turned. A footman descended, his movements precise, his livery immaculate. He did not glance at the hall, nor at the onlookers who had begun to gather. His attention was fixed solely upon Eleanor. With a slight bow, He opened the carriage door and spoke her name, correctly, respectfully, as though it had never been in question. "Miss Whitcomb," he said. "You are expected." Eleanor stood motionless, rain darkening the hem of her gown, her heart striking hard and fast. She had not seen the Duke of Ravenscourt in months, not since a chance encounter at a winter charity concert where no promises had been exchanged, no impropriety committed. And yet, here was his carriage, waiting, at the precise moment society had turned its back. Behind her, Ashbourne Hall glittered on, oblivious. Before her, the open door yawned like a threshold between worlds. Eleanor drew a breath, steadying herself against the sudden, dangerous rise of hope, and stepped closer, unaware that in doing so she had already crossed a line from which there would be no quiet return. The carriage moved before Eleanor fully realized she had stepped inside it. The door closed with a sound too final to be mistaken for courtesy, and the footman's voice faded into the rain as the horses surged forward, their hooves striking the stones with deliberate force. Candlelight glowed from within the carriage, steady and warm, casting gold along the velvet seats and the polished wood panels that bore the quiet authority of old power. For a moment, Eleanor sat in silence, her breath shallow, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that the damp leather of her gloves creased beneath her fingers. Outside, the street slipped past in blurred impressions of lamplight and shadow. Somewhere behind them, Ashbourne Hall receded, along with the eyes that had weighed her worth and found it wanting. She should have demanded explanation. She should have asked why this carriage, of all carriages, had been sent for her. Instead, she stared at the small brass lamp fixed to the wall opposite her, watching its flame sway with emotion, and tried to still the tremor moving through her chest. From a narrow compartment beside the seat, a folded note slid forward, guided by a discreet mechanism Eleanor had not noticed before. It came to rest near her knee, its seal unbroken, the wax impressed with the same crest she had glimpsed on the carriage door. Ravenscourt. Even now, the name carried weight enough to alter the course of rooms and reputations alike. She hesitated only a moment before lifting it. The paper was thick, the hand unmistakable. She had seen it once before, on the margin of a program passed quietly to her during a charity concert months earlier, bearing nothing more than a single line of polite inquiry. Tonight, the words were fewer still. "Forgive the intrusion. You should not walk away alone." No signature followed. None was needed. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, the carriage's gentle sway suddenly too intimate, too aware of her presence. The Duke of Ravenscourt was not a man given to impulsive gestures, if society's portrait of him held any truth. He was known for reserve, for a gaze that observed more than it revealed, for a distance that kept even the boldest admirers at bay. That such a man would send his carriage into a rain-soaked street to retrieve a woman freshly dismissed was not merely unexpected. It was incendiary. Outside, the city seemed to sense it. As they passed through familiar streets, Eleanor glimpsed figures pausing beneath shop awnings, drivers craning their necks, servants whispering into gloved hands. The ducal crest was a beacon. Wherever it went, attention followed, and attention, she knew, was rarely kind. Already, she could imagine the shape of tomorrow's conversations, the raised brows, the carefully phrased concern. A fallen woman did not simply vanish into obscurity when a duke intervened. She became a question. The carriage slowed as it turned into a broader avenue, one lined with tall townhouses whose windows glowed softly against the night. Eleanor's reflection wavered in the glass beside her, pale and unfamiliar, her composure frayed at the edges. She straightened instinctively, smoothing her skirt, as though posture alone might shield her from judgment. When the carriage finally came to a halt, it was not before a private residence, nor any place she immediately recognized. The street was quieter here, the rain thinning into mist. A single gas lamp illuminated the pavement, its light catching on wrought iron gates set back from the road. Beyond them rose a stone facade severe in its symmetry, neither ostentatious nor welcoming. The door opened, and the footman appeared once more, his expression unreadable. He offered his hand. Eleanor accepted it, stepping down with care, aware of the chill seeping through her shoes and the steady pulse of uncertainty urging her back. No command was spoken, yet the expectation was unmistakable. Inside, the air smelled faintly of beeswax and old books. A small antechamber awaited her, lit by wall sconces, its furnishings restrained but exquisite. Upon a narrow table lay a velvet box, open, its contents revealed without ceremony. A cameo brooch rested inside, ivory against dark fabric, its carved profile unmistakable. Her mother's likeness. Eleanor's breath caught sharply. The brooch had been lost years ago, vanished during the chaos following her father's death. Its recovery had long since been abandoned as a childish hope. She stepped closer, her fingers hovering before daring to touch it, half afraid the image would dissolve beneath her gaze. Behind her, a voice spoke, low and measured. It seemed unkind to keep it any longer. She turned. The Duke of Ravenscourt stood just within the doorway, his dark coat immaculate despite the weather, his presence filling the room without effort. He did not approach her, did not bow deeply or offer florid apology. He simply met her eyes, his expression composed, observant, and touched with something that might have been regret. "I did not wish to cause you distress," he continued, "but I would not have you believe tonight's events define you." Eleanor's throat tightened. The room felt suddenly too small, the air charged with implication. Outside, the city carried on, ignorant of the fragile balance being struck within these walls. She straightened, gathering the remnants of her composure, and asked the only question that mattered. "Why now, Your Grace?" For the first time, his restraint faltered, just enough for her to see it. The pause stretched, heavy with all that had gone unsaid, all that society forbade. Then he answered, not with excuse, but with quiet resolve. "Because tonight," he said, "you were left unguarded, and I will not allow the world to mistake your silence for surrender." The fire had been lit before she arrived, though Eleanor could not say how she knew. Perhaps it was the way the flames burned low and steady, as if tended by someone who understood patience, or the faint warmth that lingered in the air, easing the chill from her bones without demanding gratitude. She stood just inside the room, hands folded, her posture precise, every instinct urging restraint even as her pulse betrayed her. The Duke did not invite her to sit at once. He moved instead to the hearth, adding a single log with deliberate care, giving her time to recover herself, or perhaps granting her the dignity of choosing when to speak. In the quiet that followed, Eleanor became acutely aware of small things. The muted tick of a clock somewhere beyond the walls, the soft crackle of burning wood, the scent of rain clinging faintly to his coat. "You may sit if you wish," he said at last, turning toward her. She inclined her head and took the chair nearest the fire, smoothing her skirt with a motion that felt rehearsed, protective. He remained standing, one hand resting lightly on the mantel, his gaze steady but not intrusive. The arrangement was not accidental. It placed no demand upon her, yet offered no retreat. "I did not expect this evening to unfold as it has," Eleanor began, then paused. The words sounded inadequate, brittle against the weight of what had occurred. She tried again. "If my presence here invites misunderstanding, I would rather leave than become the subject of another." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he crossed the room and took the chair opposite her, far enough to preserve decorum, close enough that she could not ignore him. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but beneath it lay a current of restrained intensity. "Misunderstanding will come regardless," he said. "The question is whether you will continue to bear it alone." The firelight caught his features, sharpening the lines of his face, revealing a seriousness that society often softened with rumor. Eleanor studied him as she had never dared before, noting the faint weariness at the corner of his eyes, the discipline with which he held himself. This was not a man accustomed to confession, nor one who offered comfort lightly. "You assume much, Your Grace," she said gently. "I have endured disappointment before." "I know," he replied. "I have seen it." Her breath stilled. "Seen it?" He nodded once. "Not tonight alone. In drawing rooms where your silence was mistaken for agreement. In conversations where others spoke for you, believing you too polite to object. I watched, because it seemed no one else did." The admission unsettled her more than accusation might have done. She rose, restless, crossing to the window where rain traced faint paths down the glass. Beyond it, the city lay dim and watchful, its judgments already forming. She spoke without turning. "And you said nothing." "No," he agreed. "Because until this evening, You were bound by promises not your own. I would not interfere where choice had not been freely given. Eleanor pressed her gloved hand against the cool pane, steadying herself. The truth of his words stirred something dangerously close to relief, followed swiftly by anger at her own vulnerability. "You speak of choice," she said, "yet I find myself here without having sought it." At that, he stood. Not abruptly, but with intent. "You are here because I offered shelter, not command. If you wish to depart, my carriage will return you wherever you desire. But I would be dishonest if I did not tell you why I intervened." She turned then, meeting his gaze. "Then tell me." He took a breath, as though measuring the distance between duty and desire. "Because I recognized, in your restraint, a strength rarely acknowledged. Because when others dismissed you, you remained whole. And because tonight, when they withdrew their regard, I saw the world preparing to diminish you, and I refused to permit it." The word settled between them, neither plea nor declaration, but something more dangerous for its restraint. Eleanor felt the familiar armor of composure crack, just slightly. She moved back toward the fire, closer now, the warmth no longer merely physical. "You risk much by saying this," she murmured. "I risk more by remaining silent," he answered. The clock chimed softly, marking an hour she would never recall without remembering this moment. Eleanor's thoughts turned, gathering courage she had long denied herself. She lifted her chin. "If I accept your protection," she said, "it will be said that I sought advancement through disgrace, that I exchanged one failed promise for another more powerful." He did not flinch. "They will say it regardless. What matters is whether you believe it." She searched his face, seeking vanity, ambition, anything that might lessen the weight of his words. She found none. Instead, she found resolve, and beneath it, a restraint that mirrored her own. "And if I decline?" she asked. "Then you will leave here with your dignity intact," he said. "And I will respect your decision, though it costs me." The admission hung in the air, fragile and irrevocable. Eleanor felt something shift within her, a subtle rebalancing of fear and hope. She had been dismissed without explanation, judged without voice. Here, at last, was a man who offered her choice without demand. She took a step closer. "You speak as though you have already chosen." His gaze softened, just enough. "I did. Long before tonight." The fire flared, casting their shadows larger against the walls, entwined but not touching. Eleanor stood at the threshold of something unnamed, her past receding, her future uncertain. Outside, the rain continued its patient fall, while within the room, a decision waited, poised to change everything. Morning arrived pale and deliberate, as though the city itself hesitated before acknowledging what the night had altered. Eleanor woke within the Duke's guest chamber to a quiet unlike any she had known. Its stillness waited with consequence rather than peace. Sunlight filtered through tall curtains, tracing the patterned carpet at her feet, while the memory of his words lingered with an intimacy that startled her. She dressed slowly, choosing composure over haste, aware that whatever followed would require her to stand unflinching beneath watchful eyes. When the summons came, it was not delivered by servant or bell, but by the quiet certainty that waiting would only prolong surrender. She entered the morning room to find the Duke standing by the window, papers untouched upon the table. His attention fixed not on affairs of state but on her arrival. He turned as she crossed the threshold, inclination of his head measured, expression resolved, as if the night's restraint had hardened into purpose. "I will speak plainly," he said, and the words themselves felt like a declaration. Eleanor inclined her head, granting permission without surrender, her hands folded before her as they had been taught to do. He did not offer apologies for the carriage, nor explanations for the scandal already unfurling beyond those walls. Instead, he stepped closer, leaving deliberate space between them, and spoke with a steadiness that refused misinterpretation. "I intend to stand beside you," he said, "not in shadow, nor by indulgence, but in full sight of a society that would rather you disappear." The certainty of it struck her harder than any whispered insult, because it demanded something of her in return. She moved to the mantel, fingers brushing cool marble, grounding herself against the swell of sensation threatening to unseat her restraint. "You ask me to walk into scrutiny willingly," she said, voice low, "after I have just been broken by it." He followed her gaze, acknowledging the truth without retreat. "I ask you to walk knowing you will not walk alone," he replied, "and that my name will bear its share of the weight." The room seemed to contract around them, firelight deepening, shadows pressing closer, as though the house itself leaned in to witness. Eleanor turned, meeting him fully now, no longer shielded by furniture or formality. "If I accept," she said, "it must be as myself, not as a cause, nor as a woman salvaged from disgrace." His answer came without hesitation, the restraint of earlier hours giving way to something unyielding. "I seek no symbol," he said. "I seek the woman who refused to beg, who walked into rain rather than barter her dignity." Emotion rose swift and dangerous, and Eleanor felt the final defenses she had constructed begin to fall, not in collapse, but in release. She crossed the remaining distance between them, close enough to feel the heat of him, yet stopping short of impropriety. Outside, the city stirred awake, unaware that within these walls a quieter revolution was being declared. The Duke extended his hand, not as command but invitation, fingers steady, palm open. Eleanor looked at it for a long moment, understanding that this gesture would be repeated in countless retellings, each one less kind than the truth. She placed her hand in his, feeling the quiet strength there, and with that contact something irrevocable settled between them. He did not draw her closer, did not exploit the intimacy, but held her hand as one holds a promise. "There will be resistance," he said, "from those who believe rank excuses cruelty." She met his gaze steadily. "I am no stranger to resistance." A faint smile touched his mouth, brief but genuine, as though he recognized in her a companion rather than a conquest. From the corridor came distant footsteps, servants beginning their careful routines, unaware of the line just crossed. The Duke released her hand at last, formality returning like a drawn curtain, yet the connection remained unmistakable. "You will remain here today," he said, "until we decide together how best to meet what follows." It was not an order, and Eleanor recognized the care taken in that distinction. She nodded once, acceptance measured, resolve gathering where fear had once dominated. As he moved toward the door, she spoke, the question she had not known she carried finally finding voice. "When the world asks why," she said, "what will you tell them?" He paused, hand upon the doorframe, the weight of generations resting lightly on his shoulders. He did not turn fully as he answered, his voice carrying certainty enough for them both. "I will tell them the truth," he said. "That I chose you." The simplicity of it struck deeper than ceremony, and Eleanor felt the path ahead narrow into something both perilous and bright. When he left the room, the fire seemed to burn higher, as if acknowledging a vow just spoken. Eleanor stood alone, heart racing, reputation trembling, and future irrevocably altered. Beyond the windows, carriages began to pass more frequently, rumors already stirring their wings. She knew the declaration made within these walls would soon be tested beyond them, where mercy was scarce and memory long. Drawing a steadying breath, Eleanor lifted her chin, preparing to meet the world anew. Yet even as resolve settled, uncertainty flickered, for choice once claimed could never be reclaimed without cost. She moved to the window and saw, waiting at the curb below, the Duke's carriage still present, still watchful. It stood as both promise and warning, polished and patient, ready to carry her forward or expose her to judgment. Eleanor rested her palm against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of life beyond, and wondered which would reach her first. Behind her lay silence reclaimed, before her a world sharpened by scrutiny, and somewhere between them a Duke whose choice had bound their fates, though whether it would shield her or shatter her remained unanswered, as the day's first whispers began to stir outside those walls. Evening returned to Ashbourne with a different temper, neither cruel nor kind, but attentive, as though the city itself had learned to listen. The ballroom doors opened once more, admitting lamplight, perfume, and anticipation sharpened by rumor. Eleanor Whitcomb entered on the Duke of Ravenscourt's arm, her posture serene, her expression composed not by ignorance but by choice. Whispers rose instantly, yet they fractured against the quiet authority of his presence. Where once she had been measured and found lacking, she was now witnessed. The orchestra hesitated, then resumed, strings trembling with restrained excitement. Eleanor felt every gaze, yet none pierced her as before. The Duke did not tighten his hold, nor did he shield her from attention. He stood beside her, unmistakably, allowing the truth to speak without defense. This was no spectacle of rescue, but recognition. Across the room, familiar faces shifted. Lady Hale's smile faltered. Frederick's gaze dropped, not in remorse, but in recognition of finality. Eleanor did not look away. She inclined her head, granting neither forgiveness nor bitterness, only closure. That alone felt like vindication. They moved through the assembly with deliberate calm. Conversations softened as they passed, politeness hastily rearranged to accommodate the irrevocable. Eleanor sensed something loosening within her, a long-held tension released not by triumph, but by acceptance. She was no longer attempting to belong. She simply existed, and the room was forced to adjust. At the evening's height, the Duke paused beneath the central chandelier. The music stilled. Silence gathered, startled and obedient. He spoke without flourish, his voice carrying with ease. He named Eleanor as his intended companion, his equal in esteem, his chosen future. No apology followed, no justification offered. The words stood unadorned, sufficient. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then came movement, subtle but decisive. A bow. Another. Respect, not universal, but undeniable. Eleanor felt the weight of it settle not upon her shoulders, but behind her, like ground finally firm beneath uncertain feet. Later, when the carriages lined the street once more, the rain did not return. Eleanor descended the steps with measured grace, the Duke beside her, the city watching with newly tempered eyes. She understood now that legacy was not bestowed by approval, but claimed through endurance. As the carriage door closed, Eleanor allowed herself a single breath of quiet wonder. The girl who had left without a word was gone. In her place sat a woman who had spoken through resolve, whose silence had been mistaken once, but never again. The carriage moved forward, wheels turning toward a future unwritten, yet firmly chosen. Behind them, Ashbourne receded, its judgments diminished, its power broken not by defiance, but by truth finally seen. Eleanor rested her hand within the Duke's, steady, unhidden, knowing whatever awaited would be faced together, and that was vindication enough. The carriage rolled through familiar avenues transformed by lantern glow and lingering curiosity, each window reflecting possibilities Eleanor had once dismissed as dangerous dreams. She recalled her mother's quiet counsel, her father's steadfast honor, and felt them align within her, no longer opposing desire but strengthening it. The Duke watched her reflection rather than the street, attentive without intrusion, as if guarding not her reputation, but her resolve. They spoke little, yet meaning flowed easily. When the carriage slowed before Ravenscourt House, its gates opening in solemn welcome, Eleanor felt no trepidation, only clarity. She stepped down beside him, not as guest nor ward, but as acknowledged presence. Inside, servants bowed with practiced respect, already instructed, already aligned. No whispers followed her here. In the days that unfolded, society tested them. Invitations arrived cautiously, some rescinded just as quickly. Newspapers speculated with polite venom. Old allies questioned motive, while strangers measured courage. Eleanor answered none of it directly. She appeared when she chose, spoke when it mattered, and allowed silence to do its careful work. Beside her, the Duke remained constant, neither defensive nor indulgent, proving through action what words could not sustain. Their first public appearance beyond Ashbourne came at a modest charity concert, far from chandeliers and judgment. Eleanor stood beneath simple lights, her voice steady as she addressed the gathering, not as spectacle, but as steward of purpose. Applause followed, hesitant then sincere, and she understood legacy forming quietly, shaped by consistency rather than conquest. One evening, alone together at last, Eleanor acknowledged the truth she had feared. "They will never forget," she said. He answered without hesitation, "Nor should they. Memory is how change survives." The simplicity of it settled her doubts. Vindication, she realized, was not erasure, but endurance. On the anniversary of the broken betrothal, they returned to Ashbourne. The hall appeared smaller, its splendor dimmed by familiarity. Eleanor walked its length unafraid, greeting those who had once dismissed her. Some met her eyes, others did not. It no longer mattered. She had reclaimed the narrative by living it. As night deepened, the Duke led her onto the balcony overlooking the city. "Whatever comes," he said, "we meet it openly." Eleanor placed her hand over his, the gesture unremarkable, the meaning vast. Below, the city breathed, changed in ways it could not yet name. When they departed, the carriage waited as before, polished and patient, yet its purpose had altered. It no longer arrived to rescue or to scandalize. It carried two lives forward, bound by choice, steadied by truth, and illuminated by the quiet courage to be seen. That night, as dawn threatened the horizon, Eleanor understood that endings were not doors closing, but thresholds crossed with intention. Her past no longer pursued her. It followed, transformed. Whatever history recorded, it would note that a woman once dismissed chose herself, and was answered, not by rescue, but by recognition that endured. In that knowledge she rested, certain that love, once claimed with honor, would outlast rumor, outshine rank, and leave behind a legacy neither time nor society could diminish. Forever it would remain hers, and his, and theirs, alone together.